Welcome to Deep Dive. Today we're taking a really close look at some major policy shifts, ones making waves across the U.S. economy right now. Specifically, we're going deep on new, pretty aggressive tariffs on imports, and also some, frankly, surprisingly high changes to skilled worker visa fees. These actions, well, they're framed by this central question. How do these kinds of protectionist moves actually impact U.S. economic strength? And, our global competitiveness. We're going to analyze the stated goals behind these policies versus the very real economic consequences people are anticipating.
Yeah, what's really interesting here is we're looking at two quite different policy tools, aren't we? You've got trade barriers on one hand and talent barriers on the other. But both seem aimed at the same outcome, at least officially, boosting U.S. production and creating American jobs. So our job today is to try and understand the immediate effects, sure, but also the longer-term risks these policies might be introducing. And we want to do that in a way that's, professional, nuanced, but still really clear for anyone who feels these economic shifts in their day-to-day life.
Okay, let's start with the trade side then, because the measures seem quite sweeping. The administration has put forward this new economic policy. The official line is it's meant to reduce reliance on, foreign supply chains and really aggressively boost domestic production here, get industry back on U.S. soil. So what are the key numbers we need to grasp when we talk about these new trade barriers?
Well, the foundation really is this new 10% baseline tariff. And that's not targeted at specific things. It applies broadly. We're talking almost all imports coming into the U.S. That fundamentally changes the cost picture for, nearly every business involved in international trade.
Right. So basically a 10% tax on almost everything coming in. Simple as that. But the things that really jumped out, at least initially, were these very specific, extremely high tariffs aimed at certain partners, certain products. Like we saw a 50% duty on some goods from India.
That's right. And the number that's really setting off alarms, particularly among economists, is the huge 100% tariff placed specifically on Indian pharmaceutical products. Now, if the stated goal is, say, national self-sufficiency, you might think, okay, a tariff this big should just force companies to make these drugs domestically, right? So why are economists so quick to warn about inflation and potentially healthcare crises instead?
Yeah, that is the key question, isn't it? If you're forcing the market's hand, why isn't the expected reaction positive?
Because, fundamentally, a tariff isn't really a subsidy for domestic production. It acts much more like a tax. It's a consumption tax, really, paid initially by the importer, which then typically gets passed down the chain to the consumer. So when you look specifically at that 100% duty on Indian generic drugs, well, the impact could be quite severe because the U.S. relies heavily on them. Our analysis shows India supplies nearly 40% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, the APIs, the essential building blocks for U.S. generic medicines. Just slapping 100% duty on these already low-cost generics doesn't instantly create a cheaper American factory overnight. What it does, potentially immediately, is double the cost of essential medicines. And that could significantly raise healthcare bills for hospitals and for individuals too.
That really puts the risk into perspective. It hits prescription costs directly. And then beyond just the costs here at home, there's always the global reaction, right? These things tend to escalate.
Absolutely. You always have to consider the potential blowback, retaliatory tariffs, likely levied by India in this case. And history shows that in trade disputes, countries don't just target random goods. They often go after politically sensitive American exports. Think things like U.S. almonds, maybe, or agricultural products, or even specialized manufactured goods like Harley-Davidson motorcycles, perhaps. So retaliation could really hurt U.S. farmers and exporters who depend on having access to that Indian market.
Okay, so we've looked at the policies hitting physical imports, the goods coming across the border, but now let's shift gears and look at the movement of, what some call our most valuable import. Human capital, talent. We're moving from tariffs on products to this new, very substantial cost tied to skilled immigrant workers, specifically those using the H-1B visa program.
Exactly. And just for clarity, the H-1B is that specialized visa. It allows U.S. companies, especially in fields like tech and specialized sciences, to hire high-skilled foreign workers, usually on a temporary basis. The policy change here is, it's introducing a huge price tag, a new $100,000 fee for every H-1B visa application.
Wow, that $100,000 figure is just striking, particularly when you think about how that compares to the actual annual salary for many people in these specialized roles. Now, the stated purpose seems clear enough. Supporters argue this massive fee will discourage companies from hiring foreign skilled workers and therefore, open up those jobs for American workers instead.
Right, but if we connect this policy to the sort of wider reality, especially post-pandemic, This is where it might create a very unexpected, perhaps counterproductive outcome. Critics are warning that this really high cost might actually speed up global outsourcing, not boost domestic hiring. It doesn't actually force companies to hire someone locally, it just makes it incredibly expensive to bring that talent physically into the US.
Which leads us to the argument raised by economist Peter Schiff. He's known for his, let's say, critical views on U.S. government regulation and protectionism generally. What was his specific warning about this visa fee?
Schiff argued specifically that if a company is faced with a $100,000 entry fee just to bring someone in a fee that, as you said, can often exceed the worker's entire annual salary, well, they're much more likely just to hire that same foreign worker remotely, let them stay in their home country. From the company's perspective, it becomes a pretty straightforward financial decision.
And the consequence of that shift towards remote hiring of foreign talent has really deep economic implications locally for cities all across the U.S. If that highly skilled worker stays overseas, what's the ripple effect here?
Well, the fundamental issue is the loss of that person's economic contribution locally. Remote workers, even if they're doing valuable work for a U.S. firm, they don't pay U.S. income taxes. That's the big one. And perhaps more critically for local areas, they're not spending their earnings in the local U.S. economy. That means less money going to local landlords, restaurants, coffee shops, small businesses, you name it. So the argument is, you might think you're saving a job in, say, Seattle, but you might have actually just sped up the creation of a remote job in Bangalore and lost all the local tax revenue and spending that would have come with the Seattle job. That's the core unintended consequence being flagged.
And this remote option, it's just so much more feasible now than it was even 5 or 10 years ago, right? The whole rise of remote first hiring since 2020 means companies have gotten really good at tapping global talent pools efficiently without needing relocation. So this $100,000 fee could almost act like a powerful push, a financial incentive to keep those high-value, high-skill jobs remote.
Exactly. The infrastructure is there, the processes are refined. So a policy that was likely intended to force jobs back into the U.S. may unintentionally be accelerating the dispersion of those very jobs globally, and all while ensuring those skilled workers contribute precisely zero income tax or local spending to the U.S. economy. It's a classic example of how protectionist measures can sometimes create unexpected leakages.
So, okay, let's try and synthesize this. What does it all mean when we put the trade policies and the talent policies together? We've seen high tariffs potentially risking inflation and hitting consumer pockets. And we've seen these high visa fees potentially risking accelerated outsourcing, undermining local economies. What are the sort of broader systemic risks that economists are flagging when they look at this dual approach?
They tend to fall into about 3 major categories, I'd say, and these impact long-term U.S. competitiveness, not just immediate prices. First, as we've discussed quite a bit, are those generalized inflationary pressures, the tariffs acting like a direct tax across the board, pushing prices up.
Okay, inflation's the first one. And the second risk you mentioned touches more on the future. Innovation slowdowns.
Yes, exactly. If you restrict the inflow of highly specialized global talent, even if it's indirectly through making it too expensive, that could potentially stunt innovation. Research and development, too. I mean, a lot of the specialized knowledge needed for cutting-edge fields like AI, advanced computing, biomedical research, it resides with talented people all over the world. If we make it prohibitively expensive to bring that knowledge here, R&D projects might slow down, and investment could even shift to countries perceived as more welcoming to that global expertise.
That makes sense. And the third risk, you said it often gets overlooked, but it's crucial for the talent pipeline down the road, the impact on U.S. universities.
That's right. U.S. higher education relies pretty heavily on international students. And not just for the tuition fees, although that's part of it, but also because these students often fill graduate programs, PhD slots, research teams, especially in STEM fields. So policies that send a signal, even indirectly, that the U.S. is less welcoming to skilled foreigners, well, that could deter bright students from choosing to enroll here in the first place. And that could weaken the long-term strength of American science and technology programs.
So despite all this talk about risks and, unintended consequences, the broader context hasn't changed overnight. The United States is still, by far, the world's largest economy, unmatched military power globally. Which brings us back, I suppose, to that core debate, that tension we started with. Do these kinds of protectionist policies actually achieve the goal of making America stronger, more self-reliant? Or do they, perhaps unintentionally, risk undermining the very global competitiveness and economic dynamism that currently defines U.S. leadership on the world stage? That really seems to be the essential trade-off these policies present.
And this discussion, really, like all our deep dives, is aimed at giving you the key information. and maybe some of the nuanced perspectives you need to navigate these complex economic policy debates yourself, helping you understand not just what has changed, but perhaps why it matters maybe to your own wallet or just to the future shape of the economy.
Right. So just to offer a quick recap, a short brief of what we've discussed, we explored how introducing that 10% baseline tariff, plus those extremely high targeted duties like the 100% on Indian pharmaceuticals, brings real risks of inflation and potentially serious healthcare cost increases for everyday people. We also dug into how that very substantial $100,000 H-1B visa fee, which was intended, supposedly, to protect domestic workers, might actually push companies faster towards remote global outsourcing instead, which ironically could hurt local U.S. economies by removing tax revenue and local spending from the equation. The information really presents a clear tension, doesn't it, between wanting protectionist measures and needing to maintain that vital global competitiveness.
We certainly hope this discussion has given you plenty to think about as these policies continue to play out.
All the best, and we will meet again with another important matter again.